Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrew Chrisman. I'm one of the reporters for Senior Housing News, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar of Predictive Analytics and Senior Living, Unlocking Growth with a Human-First Approach. First and foremost, I would like to thank ADage Marketing Group for sponsoring today's webinar. A few housekeeping items before we do get started. Feel free to type and submit questions as you have them, and we'll get to as many as we can during the webinar. A recording of the presentation and the slides will be made available after the conclusion of today's webinar, so please look out for an email with a link to the slides and instructions for accessing those materials. Now, without further ado, allow me to introduce our speaker today, Adrian Mansfield, co-founder and chief strategy officer of ADage Marketing Group. Adrian Mansfield is the co-founder and chief strategy officer of ADage Marketing Group, bringing over 15 years of experience in data-driven marketing. Passionate about bridging the gap between technology and human connection, Adrian has helped numerous senior living communities transform scattered data into actionable insights that drive occupancy and ROI. She believes in combining cutting-edge analytics with a genuine understanding of resident motivations, ensuring that marketing campaigns not only reach the right audience, but also speak directly to their needs. Adrian's work has been featured in national senior living publications, and she regularly consults with leadership teams on aligning their sales, marketing, and operational strategies around a unified, data-backed vision. Outside of work, she's an avid traveler and coffee enthusiast who's always looking for the next big idea, most likely in a book. So, Adrian, welcome. So I know that today we're going to keep it pretty casual with a bit of a Q&A. So I guess first and foremost, how can small senior living communities start applying predictive analytics without significant resources?
I think that as we go through today's presentation, you're going to see an incredible explanation around how we can, with limited budgets, start to really actualize some of the data insights we already have within our organizations.
Okay, so what's the first step to take when applying hyper-segmentation for communities with limited data?
I would say that we typically starting with just an initial data append, starting with data hygiene, cleaning those individuals who are no longer with us out of your database, getting your teams oriented around setting stages and lead cycles.
Okay, so could you provide some specific tools or platforms to integrate predictive analytics into CRMs?
So a lot of the CRMs now have the ability to connect in through whatever platforms you're already using. So whether that's tying your marketing automation platform, behavior triggers into your CRM data, or creating custom ID boxes within your CRM for things like veteran status. So there's a lot that can be done with the current technology.
Okay. So how do you ensure data quality and consistency across sources?
So that's everyone's primary objective. I think that understanding as an organization how impactful your data is the first step in making sure that we are using actionable data.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit on the sales manager side of things. How can sales use personas to streamline follow-up and convert faster?
I think that's going to be answered as we move into the presentation for today.
Sure thing.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I am Adrian Mansfield, the co-founder of ADage Marketing Group. And if you're here, you're probably feeling the pressure. Census goals seem harder to hit. There's marketing budgets that are consistently shrinking. And the old playbook that we've been using with blanket outreach and one-size-fits-all messaging is no longer getting the results that it used to. But today isn't just about what's not working. Today, it's about what happens when we stop guessing and start using real human insight to guide every message, every campaign, and every dollar we spend. So we'll move from theory into real results, and we'll give you a proven framework that shows you how predictive analytics really works in senior living, and give you a playbook that you can start using immediately, even with limited time and budget. So let's get started. Here's the hard truth. According to industry data, up to 60% of your marketing budget might be going up in flames. So today we're going to uncover why that happens and how you can start reclaiming that wasted spend to drive results. And it's not because your team isn't trying hard enough. It's because most senior living marketing is still based on outdated assumptions, targeting too broadly, saying the same thing to everyone, and relying on tactics that aren't connected to what prospects actually care about. And the result is that beautiful brochures go unread and campaigns fall flat. As the leads trickle in, the conversions don't follow. But the real problem is that most communities don't even realize this is happening. Today, we'll show you what to do about it and where you can get that 60% back. The industry as a whole is at a crossroads. The demand for services is skyrocketing, but budget belts are tightening, and everyone is looking for ways to navigate this shift and still try to thrive with all of these challenges. So as the demand surges, the 65% population grew nearly 40% in one decade, and we're on track to need over 500,000 new units in senior living by 2030. And then on the other hand, the marketing budgets are shrinking. In Q1 of this year alone, spending dropped by 5%, which is the sharpest quarterly decline in over 4 years. So here we are, pressure rising, resources tightening, and many teams still relying on the same generalized tactics they've used for years. So what we see clearly is that you can't keep applying an old playbook to a new reality. To succeed now, we need to work smarter, not harder. So now that we've touched on the high-level challenges, we need to circle back to see exactly where that 60% was being lost. So by digging deeper into 3 critical areas where marketing efforts fall short, we can then address how to fix them. And it comes down to these 3 breakdowns. Shallow data. Most marketing teams are working with incomplete pictures of their audience. They might know someone's age or income or zip code, but not their motivations or their values or their communication styles. That's like trying to navigate a cross-country trip with a half a map. And then second, we run into generic messaging. Here we see every prospect receiving the same language, the same tone, the same offer, which leaves no one feeling seen. And when your audience doesn't feel seen, then they don't engage. And then third is misaligned teams. So marketing saying one thing, sales another, and operations another. And that lack of internal alignment leads to inconsistent experience, which leads to lost leads. So by fixing these 3 points, that's really the key to turning wasted spend into usable results. So we'll show you how to do that. So let's pause for a moment with this image. Does this look familiar? This quote sums up one of the biggest disconnects in senior living marketing. A prospect, 67 years old, active and independent, receives a brochure for memory care. Immediately, he feels unseen, misunderstood. And even if your community does offer independent living, he's already disengaged. That's what happens when we rely on assumptions rather than insights. So once the message misses the mark, our best leads walk away, typically silently. And that story is not unique. It's happening across the entire country every day. And fixing it doesn't mean we need more leads. It means we need more relevance. So how do we fix a broken funnel? Well, at ADage, we use what we call the human first philosophy. It's a strategic model that's designed to help you move your marketing from broad and generic to precise and personal. Each letter represents a step in the process. So H is for hyper-segmentation, identifying not just who your prospects are, but how they behave. U is for understanding, uncovering what truly motivates someone to move. M is for market personally, build messages that speak directly to their motivations. A is for aligning your teams, making sure your sales, marketing, and ops are all pulling in the same direction. And N is for nurture. Because when it comes to senior living, that move doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So this is the framework that's built for today's senior living audience and all of the teams who serve them. And we'll walk through each part. So understanding your audience goes beyond the demographics, as I said. You have to explore the motivations that are the key to connecting with prospects in a way that's going to resonate. So this is where most marketing efforts begin and end. Age, income, zip code, maybe marital status. So you end up with a profile like this. 75 years old, 85,000 annual income, lives in 18966. But does that really tell you anything meaningful about that person, about what matters to them? Not really. So when we hyper-segment by layering in behavioral and psychographic data, we then identify patterns that actually drive conversions. Like this, recently widowed, risk-averse but independent, prefers phone over email, drawn to wellness programming. Suddenly, we don't just have a lead, we have a story. And that changes the way that we write the copy, design the mailer, schedule the follow-up, and measure the success. Hypersegmentation is about the difference between guessing who someone is and knowing what they really care about. Next is you. And even once we know who someone is, it's still important to understand why they act. And this is where motivations come in. So here's two great examples. We've got two prospects, same age, same income, same zip code. So on paper, they look identical. But prospect A is feeling isolated. She's craving community and purpose and connection. And prospect B values independence above all else. She is not interested in your social calendars. She is focused on maintaining control, ensuring peace and privacy for herself. So if you send them the same messaging, at least one of them is going to be completely feeling misunderstood. And that's why understanding motivation is so critical. When we tap into what drives someone's decision, whether that's security, freedom, legacy, belonging, we can create marketing that feels personal even before the first conversation. And that's what moves people forward. So now that we understand motivations, it's time to talk about how to market personally. When your message is tailored to each prospect's unique needs, the impact can be transformational. So when you see their motivation, you suddenly are able to start speaking to them rather than just at them. And that's where most campaigns go wrong. Even if they've identified the right audience, they use the same message for everyone. So here's how we market personally. Prospect A, as I said, is a connector. So she's energized by people and by purpose, and her message should be belong, connect, thrive, delivered through a warm, community-focused event invite that feels vibrant and open-ended. And then you've got prospect B. She's a planner, right? So her message needs to be private, predictable, peaceful, sent via a low-pressure direct mail piece, and maybe followed by a gentle check-in call, not an aggressive sales pitch. So we have the same community, we have the same product, and we have two totally different audiences. That's why the messaging has to be different. The person on the other end is different. So it's not harder, it's just smarter. Then we move into aligning teams, and this is something we see in even the most well-run organizations. Marketing is focused on storytelling and engagement. Sales is focused on timelines and conversions. Operations is focused on fulfillment and care delivery. And they're all speaking slightly different languages. The problem is that your prospects notice. So maybe marketing promises a vibrant lifestyle, but sales leads with availability and rates. Or a prospect hears about flexible dining in an email, only to find out when they tour that there are limited options available. That kind of misalignment erodes trust. When you align your teams around a shared understanding of your personas and their motivations, everything changes. Campaigns flow naturally into conversations. Sales follow-up feels more relevant, and operations is able to deliver on exactly what was promised. Internal alignment creates external confidence. And in today's market, confidence converts. So let's talk about timing. In senior living, we all want the same thing: a warm inquiry, a quick decision, and a smooth move-in. But that's really not how it works for most people. The decision to move into senior living is a deeply personal one, highly emotional one, and it doesn't happen all at once. And that's why nurturing your prospects over time is essential. We break it down from their perspective into 4 stages. Curious, I'm just looking. Cautious, I'm not ready yet. Considering, this could be right for me. Or committed, I'm ready to take the next step. And that next step could just be coming in for a tour or allowing you to have their address. So if your marketing is only speaking to people at the committed stage, you're missing a huge section of the audience. Nurturing means staying connected at every phase with relevant, respectful messaging that meets people where they are and that builds trust instead of delivering pressure. And then when someone's ready, they'll remember the brand that made them feel understood the whole way through. One of the hills that I'm always willing to die on is that the last man standing wins. When we've done market research in the past, we've seen no follow-up, minimal follow-up, and then we've also seen communities that are still following up a year or 2 later. So that nurture component is incredibly important. So with that, we've concluded the human first framework, and I want to take a moment to drive this home with an example that's kind of hard to forget. So I want you to imagine 2 72-year-old men, both born in England, both are wealthy and both are famous, Feel free to drop your guesses in the chat if you're feeling like a trivia champ. Got some clues here. No? All right. On the left, we have Ozzy Osbourne. And on the right, we have Prince Charles. They are the same demographics, same generation, and entirely different worldviews. Prince Charles is about tradition, diplomacy, refinement. He responds to language that reflects duty and legacy. Ozzy, he's all about freedom, rebellion, chaos, and expression. You're not reaching him with an invite with a royal crest and serif fonts. And yet most marketing still treats 72-year-olds like one homogeneous group. That's the danger of relying on demographics alone. Because if you target by age and income, you might think you're hitting your target, but you're actually speaking to no one in particular. That's why we leverage psychographics. We understand their mindset, their values, and their decision behavior. Because we believe that how someone thinks tells us a whole lot more about them than how old they are. So I want to test this idea again, but this time with a twist. Picture two women, born in the early 1980s, both American, both world famous, and both were married or are married with intense public attention. On paper, they're practically twins. But on one side, you've got Meghan Markle, former actress turned Duchess. And on the other side, Britney Spears, pop icon and social lightning rod. So we've got pop stars and princesses, same generation, same fame, different psychographics. Meghan would be aligned with causes like family and legacy, and she values dignity, privacy, and purposeful communication, whereas Britney would be more driven by freedom, self-expression, and emotional autonomy. She'll reject control and demand authenticity. So you wouldn't market to the two of them the same way, right? When we look at demographics only, that's exactly what happens. Because while the two of them might be the same age, they see the world and your message through entirely different lenses. So if you're not seeing that, you're not speaking to either of them. So we can move this out of theory and into the real world. What you're looking at here are 4 actual Experian mosaic personas from the nationally validated segmentation model. These aren't fictional characters or made-up marketing archetypes. They're statistically defined profiles based on demographic, lifestyle, behavioral, and psychographic data. And they're used by brands across healthcare, finance, and housing worldwide. We selected these 4 because they were the most prevalent personas in a recent analysis we did for a nationwide provider. So allow me to introduce them. We've got the connector, an active, independent, and deeply community-driven person who wants meaningful relationships and wellness options and a place to belong. Then we've got the homebody, comfort first, cautious, skeptical of change. He's going to look for predictability, familiar routines, and one-on-one conversations. And then we've got the advocate, purpose-driven, socially aware, engaged in broad causes. That person's not just choosing a residence, they're selecting a place that aligns with their values. And then we've got the belonger, loyal, grounded, family-oriented, a person who values safety and warmth and steady relationships, looking to be part of something close-knit and consistent. So each of these personas obviously has a different motivator and therefore a different path to move in. That's why understanding who they are and how they move is the foundation of personalized marketing that actually performs. Once you begin to work with personas like these, the data starts to sound a little bit more human. That's really the power of psychographics. They help you hear what your audience is saying, not explicitly, but is absolutely feeling. So here's some real world examples. This is what your prospects would say if they were talking to you. The connector is not asking about square footage. She is wondering if the people in your community are going to understand her. She wants to feel part of something bigger without giving up her independence. And our advocate, he wants to make sure that his choice reflects his principles. Does your community align with what he cares about? That matters to him more than what amenities you have. And our homebody is wary of being pushed into something before he's ready. He wants to know that you won't pressure him and understand that he's not ready for a sales pitch. And then we have our belonger. For her, it's all about emotional warmth and reliability. She wants to know that someone's going to greet her by name and see her as a person rather than a unit number. These are evidence-based modeled statements grounded in how these personas think and choose. So when your marketing reflects this level of emotional intelligence and nuance, prospects don't just feel seen, they actually feel safe to take next steps. And this is where it starts. Step one. So we start with analyzing the right data. And here's the good news. Most of the data, as I mentioned earlier, that you need is already sitting inside of your CRM or your marketing automation platform. We start out by reviewing 18 to 24 months of resident and influencer data, sometimes including prospects in that analysis as well. And we're looking for inquiry sources and timing, lead to tour and move-in cycles, which campaigns resulted in conversions, when and where people chose to engage, email, phone, events. But we don't stop at the behavior. Once we establish those patterns, then we overlay the psychographics so we can see not just what someone did, but why they did it. And that allows us to answer higher value questions like, what's your highest converting prospects have in common? Or what were their motivations and fears and decision styles? Which channels or messages moved them forward most effectively? So this step turns scattered activity into strategic insight, and it's the foundation for everything that follows. So once you've identified and analyzed the right data, the next step is to build high converting profiles based on what's already working. This isn't about reinventing the wheel. It's about reverse engineering success. So we start by identifying the top 50% of your historical leads, those who actually moved in, and then we ask, what did they respond to? How long did they take to decide? What channels do they prefer? What psychographic patterns show up across the board? And then from there, we build composite personas that combine those motivators, behaviors, and channel preferences so that they're not fictional characters, they're data-backed portraits of who your next best leads are likely to be. You're no longer relying on instincts or generalizations. You have a clear blueprint of who to prioritize and how to engage them and where you can focus your marketing budget. That's the shift from reactive to predictive. And it's one of the most powerful tools you can give your team. Now comes the part that most teams rush into first, but it really only works if steps 1 and 2 are done correctly, tailoring campaigns that actually stick. This is where you bring everything together, taking the personas that are built and designing messaging and outreach that match their specific values, motivators, and communication styles. It's not just about what you say, it's about the right message at the right time and in the right format. So for example, our connector is going to get an upbeat invite to a wellness event. Our homebody is going to get a soft touch print piece and a personal phone call. Our advocate is going to see a values forward messaging on a purpose-driven landing page. And our belonger is going to respond best to warm face-to-face outreach with a familiar name. So we're going to pack up our signature dish or treat and drop it off at their house. Same community, 4 separate campaigns, all tailored to resonate and convert with those segments. And here's the key. As I mentioned earlier, this is scalable. With the right segmentation in place, personalization doesn't create more work. It creates more effective work. And then when your campaigns reflect who someone really is, they don't feel like marketing, they feel like relevance. And that's what builds ultimately engagement, trust, and action. So we've covered the process, analyze the right data, build the right profiles, and tailor campaigns that align. But what happens when we put that strategy into practice? This is a real case study that we did for a multi-site nonprofit provider that came to us facing very familiar challenges. Their campaigns were based on broad demographics, their messaging wasn't landing, their sales team was wasting time on low likelihood leads. And so we started by enriching their database with 300 lifestyle and psychographic attributes, and then created clear persona segments based on how people made decisions, not just who they were on paper. And finally, we delivered tailored multi-channel segmented campaigns that spanned across mail, email, events, and CRM follow-up tactics, which generated pretty healthy results. 90% occupancy sustained across their portfolio, 50% reduction in their marketing waste. And this is the big one. Just 19% of their prospects drove 37% of their move-ins. So that's the value of shifting the messaging and shifting the outcomes. And that's ultimately the power of predictive personalization in senior living marketing. So by now, we've covered how predictive personalization improves marketing results, but it doesn't really just stop there. When you start aligning your messaging with motivation, the effects ripple across the entire organization. For investors, it builds confidence with stronger data and 5-year census forecasts backed by behavioral insights and seasonal trends. Leadership is able to make bolder growth moves at a lower risk. For operations, it means better planning. We know who's most likely to move in and when, and teams can prepare staffing, dining, wellness, and logistics more effectively. For marketing, it means better outcomes. We're delivering real returns, cutting wasted ad spend, and boosting engagement by typically 30% or more. And for sales, it means faster lead cycles. With every prospect already better qualified, conversion doesn't just increase, it accelerates. So yes, this is technically a marketing strategy, but it's also an organizational strategy. Because when your messaging and your data and your teams are aligned, everything runs smarter, faster, and better. But what's the bottom line? Massive ROI. Even the best strategy in the world, your leadership team is still going to ask you, will this pay off? And according to Forrester Research, companies that invest in deep audience understanding, what they refer to as customer obsession, see returns as high as 700% ROI. So when you compare that to traditional marketing approaches, which average about break even, 100%, that's a 7x improvement. And it's not from spending more. That's the important part. It's about spending smarter, using segmentation, personalization, and behavioral insights to connect with the right people through the right channels at the right time. So at ADage, we've seen results in the same range across our client base, especially for those using psychographic segmentation at the front end of their campaign strategy. The data doesn't suggest it works, it proves it. And predictive personalization, ultimately for your leadership teams, is not a gamble. It's one of the most efficient, reliable, and scalable ways to improve occupancy and prove marketing's value at the leadership table. So I'm sure everyone is wondering, where do we even start? Well, this is it. We've made it simple with an actionable 3-step path. You can book a free assessment. We'll look at your current marketing data, campaigns, and audience approach. There's no prep required. We'll meet you wherever you are. And then you can receive a custom persona report, and that will allow you, based on your existing data and market area, to have psychographic profiles that show who your most promising leads really are and how they make decisions. And then you can launch a pilot campaign. So we'll help you craft and execute, if need be, a targeted campaign tailored to one or more of those personas. The goal here is not to overhaul everything overnight. It's to inject a smarter way of thinking into the work you're already doing so that you can get results better and faster. You don't need a bigger team. You don't need a new CRM. You just need a better starting point. So we're here to help take that first step. You've heard the strategies, you've heard the outcomes, but if we're being totally honest, there's probably something holding everyone here back from implementing a predictive, personalized marketing approach. And that's totally normal. So we want to hear from you. Take a moment to take a quick poll, I'll advance our slide, and help us understand what's the biggest barrier in your way. There are no wrong answers, only insights. And then we'll take a look at the responses and speak to a few of the most common challenges when we get to the Q&A. The truth is we've helped providers overcome all of these hurdles, and with the right partner and process, none of them are deal breakers. So take a second, click the one that fits, and let's keep going. I'll give it just a couple more seconds for everyone to decide. Okay, so what we're feeling like here is that we don't have the right data. We're stuck doing things the old way. budget constraints and not sure where to start. Perfect. That is great. All very valid and very common concerns before moving into a higher level of account-based marketing. Starting with finding the right data within the organization wherever it lives, starting with being open about a new approach and seeing the value of moving into a more customer intelligence focused direction, leveraging the budgets that you do have to work really effectively for you, and partnering with the right people to get you started in the right direction. So before we move into Q&A, as we close, here's what I want to leave everyone with. You do not have to keep guessing. You do not have to settle for broad messaging or scattered results. The question is really, what would change for your team if you stopped guessing? You can start marketing with precision, backed by your own data, driven by human insight, and tailored to the audiences that matter most. So to make it easier, we've pulled together some free tools, an executive summary, some persona battle cards, and we have a customizable campaign worksheet. So those are designed to help your team move from intention into action and see results without having to reinvent the wheel. So you should be able to access them in the resources section below, or you can email me at hello@adagemarketinggroup.com. Thank you guys all for spending your time with me today. And now we're going to open it up for questions so we can start solving the specific challenges you're facing.
Okay, so as a reminder, if you do have questions for Adrian, please go ahead and submit those in our little Q&A section. And I was a little overeager earlier with getting some early questions to you. So I would like to pick up kind of where we were a little bit earlier. I know that we had been talking about streamlining and following up and converting faster. I was just wondering, when it comes to persona-based outreach, how can you ensure that persona or reps implement persona-based outreach consistently?
So let's back up a little bit to what an example of persona-based outreach might look like. So circling back to our connector, this is someone who is likely already in their social community. So we're looking at outreach to churches. We're looking at outreach to volunteer groups, social organizations like the Red Hats, for example. Those are the types of outreach that we would wrap around a specific segment. And we do have segmentation tools. As we build each persona, we look at who is influencing them in their community outside of just the marketing tactics so that we can work on outreach effectively.
So how can you prioritize personas when you have limited resources?
So again, we start with typically the data append of your current database. Everyone has their database at their disposal. So start with looking for trends that you can see within the data there. Is there a certain time of year that we see an uptick? Is there some ongoing attrition that we need to be aware of? Have resident referrals or family referrals recently declined, and why? Taking a systems thinking approach to the data and realizing that tweaking something in one place might really adjust a knob over there is essential. And one of the questions that just popped in that I want to answer was Suzanne's asking about how we navigate using data in a HIPAA compliant world. The wonderful thing about the segmentation that we do is this is based on publicly available data. We're not using anything healthcare related. So we can match at a person level, a household level, and it allows us to have a starting place. That doesn't mean we don't still need to do discovery, but none of the information that we're using for append is HIPAA protected.
Okay. So how do we measure success from a small scale pilot?
So that might be, again, let's use an example of taking without a full data append, looking at doing a search in your CRM for veterans. How many people are veterans or spouses of veterans historically in your community? Using that information to develop an event maybe for Veterans Day, or doing a direct mail piece specifically informing people about VA aid and attendance. That's an example of a small scale test of one segmentation opportunity.
Okay. So we do have an audience question that
Mhm.
looks like it's a bit of a three-parter. So let me ask the full question first, and then we can kind of break this down into the three different parts. So, how do you see blockchain and AI working together? Would the two technological purposes coincide to assist the user? And would different platforms need to coexist and become compatible, or will there be platforms implementing both? Uh, a full experience for the user and one they can rely on for their benefit. So let's start with that first part with how do you see blockchain and AI working together?
So, as you said in my introduction, I'm a huge fan of marrying technology and a human first philosophy. Um, I think that properly utilized and leveraged, AI has wonderful, powerful abilities to help us be more efficient and identify patterns more quickly. That being said, I think that our senior living industry is a little behind in terms of blockchain, but I do think that there's a lot of value once we get into identifiers. So one of the biggest pain points I think that most communities experience is identifying how many times you touched an individual. So while we have, retargeting and tracking IDs, the challenge is still, is it that same person? So blockchain could definitely have an impact there. And I think that to kind of wrap that around to what systems need to talk to one another, interoperability is the name of the game. So I mentioned earlier about how important it is that we leverage our segmentation into our database. An example of that in real time would be Waypoint's lifestyle quiz. It's a fantastic tool that allows you to capture information about what interests a prospect. And the ticket is making sure that you use it. As we saw with the example of our angry man on the phone, there's a lot of times that a generic response goes out before we have the ability to catch it and do it correctly for that person. So I would say leveraging the technology stack that you currently have and making sure that as you fold new things in, interoperability is a primary driver.
Okay. Do you have statistics regarding the percentage of seniors as opposed to adult children doing the shopping for senior living? And is the funnel different when speaking directly to the senior as opposed to speaking with the adult child?
Oh, 1000%. I am so grateful someone asked that question. So, most importantly, when we do a portfolio analysis, the reason that I mentioned on that slide that we look at both residents and influencers, it's because we see about 85% of the time, even starting at independent living, the adult children are a part of that discussion. Now, that's not to say that there's not a large and growing segment of solo agers, and that's also why the circle of influence and professional outreach around them is so important. But you absolutely must treat your adult child separately from your prospect. They have different needs, they have different concerns, they are of different perspectives. I think that if you tried to talk to me in the same tone that you were speaking to my mother, both of us would be offended. So, yes, absolutely 100%. Please take the time to look separately at your influencers from your prospects. And Stephen asked a question in regards to if we're looking at our historical best conversion rate profiles, does that leave us at risk of missing new or emerging segments? Nope. And I say that with confidence because one of the things that by including the prospects into that analysis, we're able to see those emergent trends. We're able to see if there's a new zip code coming online. It's also important when looking at historical data to look at current competitors. Has something significant changed? Do we need to pivot to a new zip code? Is there a new development coming in? So I think that it's essentially an important factor as we move forward to keep that in mind.
Okay. First, I just want to thank everybody for the amazing questions so far. So please keep those coming. So, kind of shifting over to predictive analytics, how can we use predictive analytics for operations planning, such as staffing or dining?
So, again, great question. Thank you guys so much. So, when we talk about staffing, let's talk about when we've got any sort of non-HIPAA related but ailment specific information, whether that's subscription to durable medical equipment or a high level of COPD in a specific area, then we're able to adjust our care staffing accordingly. If we know that we're going to be moving in 6 people who are have ostomy bags, for example. Like these are some things that we're able to then communicate around and break down those silos between marketing, sales, and ops. Additionally, dining, I'm so glad you brought that up. So with the psychographic profiles, Mosaic, part of the way that they do their segmentation is through purchases. So Experian is a credit company. And so when we develop Experian Mosaic profiles, we're actually able to see what sort of restaurants they frequent. And if I can tell you the restaurants they frequent, I can tell you the menus they're looking at. And if I can tell you the menus they're looking at, I can tell your dining team that they don't want grits in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, where I'm located, but that if you don't show up with grits in Atlanta, Georgia, you may have a problem.
I'm going to tell you, I'm in Texas. You're going to need so many tacos. So do you have also practical examples for predictive analytics in the day-to-day workflow improvements that could be brought about?
Yes. So one of the things that I had mentioned is available as a resource are battle cards. So when we do that segmentation and we get a good solid composite profile of who your target audience is, having your sales team sit down and role play with that specific individual persona, or having creative follow-up tools already ready for specific segments. So going back to the waypoint example, if we can see with the available data that there's a high interest in gardening, then perhaps this year, as we're doing our budgetary planning, we're going to make sure that we get personalized seed packets so that we can use those for creative follow-up. So that's an example of how data works into workflow.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions here that I would like to kind of go back towards the very beginning of your presentation. And I know that you talked about the different phases that prospects might be in. A question I have is, how do we nurture leads in the cautious phase?
So when we're thinking about the cautious phase, that is someone who needs to be given some examples of peers that have made a similar decision. So there we're going to leverage testimonials. We're going to leverage a day in the life. We're going to break down some of those misconceptions that they might have, using the information we have available to us in our collateral packages, or in creative follow-ups. So using, again, understanding that they're in the cautious phase is going to change how you do that follow-up phone call. It's going to change that follow-up email. So that would be some examples, I would think.
Okay, so let's go ahead and expand that into the different phases then. What content works best across the nurturing stages, in your opinion?
I think I'm still stuck on, for the most part, to getting them to yes, they have to believe that other people have made that decision, and they have to believe that their needs are going to be met. Now, that need might be for socialization. So that person we're going to want to make sure we're calling to invite to that upcoming event. Their need might be for privacy. That might be a handwritten note that said, respecting your time, if you need anything, I'm still here. I think, again, going back to the hill that I'm willing to die on, is that the last man standing will win. So once we have a deep understanding of their motivations, it's easy to stay engaged. One of the things that we teach with our EQ Matters sales training is relationships, relationships, relationships. So if we're treating this adult child who's struggling to call us back, not picking up the phone when we call, barely replying to emails, and we're trying to nurture them forward, how would we treat our best friend who is going through dementia with her mother? We would just keep showing up, right? We would just keep trying to be as thoughtful and present and aware as possible. So I think that the personas really reinforce a lot of the emotional intelligence needed to effectively market in senior living. It is a relationship-based industry.
Okay. So kind of along those lines, we do have another audience question here. Doing personalized interviewing has been a method for sales for some time, but it still requires a lot of nurturing, getting the senior to make the leap into a move-in. So how important is the follow-up, and what is the best approach?
So the follow-up is don't give up. I'm going to make everyone giggle on this one. We have a rule here. We say we follow up until heaven or hell, either until they go to heaven or they tell us to go to hell. And I say that because it is so important to not give up. When it comes to advancing them through the sales, the same skills that you're going to use in person when you're touring them, listening actively, tying amenities to what matters to them, those are things you're going to just continue to keep doing. Leverage automation where you can. Get them on, make sure you've gotten their email address. If you're not ready right now, that's fine. Can I just email you monthly our newsletter? Stay in touch. Schedule a blitz for drop-offs for your, I think that the lost leads, I'm air quoting those, is a huge misconception in a lot of ways, other than financially not qualified or healthcare not qualified. For example, I was doing an analysis with a sales team, and in their lost leads, right up top was dated 6 months ago, moving in with granddaughter. I think 6 months is a great time to follow up and see how that worked out. That's not a lost lead. That's just a not ready yet.
Okay. Next question that we have from our audience. How can psychographics be used to identify the best location for a senior living project, or how can it rate different locations? If you'd be able to weigh in on that one.
Sure. So I think that's a great question, and it does align what product you're building to what market you're marketing to. So if it were me and I were looking at a market, you can use a platform like Claritas or Prism. We have the ability to give you a snapshot of what that market looks like based on specific mosaic segments. We also have the ability to pull listing counts based on specific mosaic segments. So if you were trying to explore a few different zip codes, we could sit down and do that. And what that does is, if we know that AO1, which is the American royalty, is really prevalent in an area, we're going to have the ability then there to build a more affluent type product. But we don't want to build a product that costs a lot in a market that's a Q62 or Q65, where it's a little more hometown, a little more rural, that it's just not going to line up. So I think that it's a great opportunity to, when you're in the planning phases, to align your amenities selections and your pricing models with what's available in the market and its most prevalence.
We had somebody else ask, are you storing the 300 behavioral insights within the CRM or in a secured cloud platform?
So for our clients, it's typically in a secured cloud platform. There is the ability to build that into your CRM. Typically, we wouldn't put all 300 criteria in there. We have a short stack of about 50 that we highly recommend looking at and identifying if that's something you feel like there's value in including in your CRM. And we have great relationships with the senior living CRMs to, facilitate that data transfer.
Okay. So kind of shifting gears here a little bit, it looks like we have some investor related questions that are a little bit more centered on ROI. I was wondering, could you share some long-term financial benefits?
So I want to give some context to that 700% ROI from Forrester. And again, I think I will make sure that link is available to everyone in the follow-up email. Customer intelligence has a 700% ROI with an average of an 11-year investment. So what that means is we have to commit to this as a long-term part of our strategy. And we have to get buy-in from our sales teams for capturing that information, our marketing teams or data market research teams for appending in that information if needed, leveraging technology and automation wherever possible. But that's the information, that's the single source of truth that allows us to make predictive analytics profiles that will then forecast in for move-in velocity, pipeline, depth. I think that there's a lot that we can do when it comes to building in historical information and leveraging over top of that or layering over top of that trend data. So new competitors coming into the market, just bringing those things to top level awareness.
Okay. So as a follow-up, what are some milestones that we should watch for in year one?
So typically we see a sales cycle contingent. So we see an improvement typically within a sales cycle and a half. So if you've got a 60-day window, we're going to start seeing results after 90 days. If you've got a 2.5-year sales cycle, like for a life plan community, it's going to take about 1.5 years to start seeing that momentum take hold. Taking into consideration the sales cycle itself and the level of care that we're marketing has a huge component in when this starts to break even. But in terms of informing your teams and aligning your organization, the impact is, I believe, immediate.
Okay. Another question that we have here is I found the best next step after phone and email is to get them into the community. And then once inside, address the issues you learned about by meeting appropriate staff and residents who have things in common. What is a way to get people to visit so they can better imagine living there or wanting to live there? Do you have any ideas on how to get them to visit?
So I'm probably going to maybe get some comments and flack for this, but not everybody is ready for a tour day one. I think part of understanding the different decision-making styles is that there are some personas that are more likely to make decisions quickly. And there are some that are more risk averse that tend to make decisions in a longer time frame. So again, going back to relationships, what we don't typically on a blind first date ask someone to come see our house. And the same is true on the first call. Let's first and foremost offer to go visit them. One of the most successful salespeople that I ever worked with was this shining star within an organization. We couldn't figure out at first why her outcomes were so much more profoundly impactful than her colleagues, even in the same community area. And it turns out it's because she visited 100% of her prospects at home, 100% home visit rate. So before you ask them to come to you, go to them. If, again, psychographically, that's appropriate. And that's where your profiles are going to help direct you.
Okay. Actually, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because another question that we have is, how do we validate third-party psychographic data?
So when it comes to third-party psychographic data, again, we're using Experian, which is verified and completely valid. Their methodology is what we're applying. Now, when it comes to how can we make sure that we're going to have an impact on those individuals, that's going to be, again, validated by your outcomes. To give you a silly example, one of the things that we can see within those 300 data points is what kind of car they drive. So if I gave you a list of car styles to go outside and walk through your parking lot, that is literally a way that you can validate this data.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations for best tools for analyzing and visualizing insights in that case?
So when it comes to first and foremost getting that data pen done, I would strongly recommend making sure you've selected what criteria you find to be most important and work with your ADage team member or your data partner to make sure that you're selecting for those criteria and getting those in the append. And then making sure that you're selecting those things that are going to be actionable for you. Earlier, I mentioned veterans, also recently widowed, recent movers, by home style or by neighborhood. So if we've seen a huge uptick in move-ins from a particular naturally occurring retirement community, then targeting their neighbors makes a lot of sense. So those are some of the ways that those things can be actionalized.
Okay. So kind of, again, shifting gears here just a little bit. I know that we've talked a lot about personas. How do we reflect family needs in those personas that have been made?
So again, I think that that's where we see doing the personas separately for the adult-child connector from your prospect. They are going to have different obstacles. They are going to have different demands, and they're going to ultimately have different demographics and geographics that we have to take into consideration. One of the things that I think we should be mindful of is staying away from the idea that all adult children want the exact same thing. The reason we do an AC connectors list rather than a broad spray and pray of, let's just use a round number of 2,000 adult children who should have parents who should fit the criteria of our community. And what we see out of that 2,000 is 500 of them aren't the decision maker. 500 of them have already made a decision around their parents. 500 of them have lost their parents. And so that leaves us having spent the money for a list of 2,000, marketed to them, followed up with them, hopefully, for an actual list of 500. Okay. So that's where we start to see that reduction in marketing waste by taking the exact prospect who will fit the criteria psychographically and demographically and matching them to their adult-child connector. You are only talking to those people who ultimately have the ability to move someone into your building.
Okay. Have you found any techniques that are effective in overcoming family hesitation?
Oh my goodness. Well, other than getting everyone certified as family therapists. No, just kidding. I would say doing separate training around understanding the multi-decision maker sale is really essential. And by that I mean there is often the brother who handles the finance, the sister who handles the medical, and the non-custodial adult child who's just doing all of the heavy lifting, right? They each have different needs and they each need to be sold to differently. I would also then layer that onto coming to them as a resource. We're here to extend the care you're already giving. We're here to support the efforts you've already made. But also understand that they each have different motivators. Some of them are trying to preserve the inheritance. Some of them are trying to just get the load off of their back. So I think that we need to ultimately do deep discovery with the adult children as well, to see what their daily life is like. How is this impacting them? And that all goes back to that emotional intelligence and good discovery.
Okay. So we only have about 5 minutes left here. I don't know about you. I feel like this hour has been absolutely flying by.
Flew by.
So we do have a question that is, what metrics should we track to compare personalized versus traditional campaigns?
So when you're doing a pilot of a segmented campaign, overall, make sure that you're using call tracking numbers and vanity URLs whenever and wherever possible. Be driving to dedicated landing pages so that you can capture that engagement. But most importantly, test. I think that we often forget that life is a learning laboratory, and this is one big experiment. So start with the data that you have, roll out a pilot, and continue your other activities as normal. And if in 90 days, 60 days, you see a difference based on that one campaign, great, do it again. Target something different, separate out couples from singles. There's a lot that we can do, and take it one step further next time. So this time, don't just send something separate to couples and to single people. This time, make sure that your imagery is of a group versus a couple. Using your demographic data appends, make sure that if it's an adult child connector son to a father, that when you're sending their data, their variable data out on their mailer, it's reflective of that.
Okay. So when it comes to that personalization, how can that be maintained at scale?
CRM. That data quality in your CRM ultimately is the driver for what you can do through marketing tactics and through sales creative follow-ups. So whether that means sitting down as a team and capturing what do we really want to know and how can we fill in those gaps right now and doing a blitz for that, or separately appending your data in on a specific area because it's important. So I think just really shifting into a customer intelligence, customer obsessed, first person approach. And then on the topic of first person, make sure that you're doing surveys and that those surveys are filling into the CRM. Often people are either the tools you already have in your tech stack or even tactics that you're doing in direct mail. You're asking for survey data and they're giving it to you. Are you moving on that? Making that a part of your workflow.
Okay, so we only have a couple minutes left. I do want to try squeezing in one or two more questions. One that we just got was, what about using other professionals to assist in the sale process, such as speaking with their doctor or social worker, the veterans advisor, or realtor to help convince the senior they are making the best decision for them by moving into assisted living?
So part of the psychographic profile tells us who their circle of influence is, right? That circle of influence for one group might be financial planners and realtors. In another group, that might be their geriatric care managers and discharge planners. So I think that starting with using your predictive analytics profile to determine who those professionals should be, and then making sure that you've connected with platforms or individuals that can feed those leads into your community.
Okay, we have about a minute left, so I want to get one more question out of you. What tools do you recommend for implementing predictive analytics in senior living?
Start with where you are. So start with your email campaigns, start with your Google targeting, start with your direct mail targeting, get everything in alignment, be clear about who you're talking to, and just roll that out organizationally. As I said, This isn't an overnight overhaul. This is a shift in how you think and how you approach marketing, sales, and ops.
Okay. Well, that is going to take us to the top of the hour. So, first and foremost, Adrian, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, ADage Marketing Group, for sponsoring today's webinar. And, audience, thank you so much for being here, participating, and sending over some very insightful questions. Adrian, again, one more time, I do want to give you just a quick thank you. As a heads up, there will be an email coming out later today with some of the materials that have been part of this webinar. But that should go ahead and wrap us up. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I hope you have a wonderful day.